Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin. Eclectic album reviews and gentle musical meanderings. Crazy hair, don't care. Welcome to my 2024 preview series. I'm just another 4 albums I've been listening to for the past couple of weeks, setting the tone for all the music I'm listening to going forward. Really looking forward to a really solid year of music this time around, especially if you're considering the albums that are in this collection. There's some stuff here you should check out. First of all, one being, of course, Caroline Rose's The Art of Forgetting.
Your father and I are in the last stage of our lives, so for God's sake, no more talk of how you imagine dying. I say this all the time, ma, but I'm really doing fine, ma. I mean, you know, sometimes, ma, life is just plain trying, ma. Just because I'm brooding and wanna kill everything moving, it doesn't mean I'm losing my marbles, I'm just moody.
Now, it's interesting to note that Caroline Rose got their start as a Americana folk artist, and really very little trace of that background really still subsists here. This comes off as an indie pop songwriting album, a real painterly approach, very varied, very vivid album. But the one carryover I think that they have from those earlier kind of earthier styles is an emphasis on the lyrics and the message of the album. And especially this album centers a lot on this relationship that Caroline Rose had experienced a breakup before the album was happening, and also their grandmother was sick and having some trouble with their health. So centering the topics in this album on sort of a centralized, localized set of traumas gives it kind of a conceptual feel. And that's strengthened a little bit by the presence of these sort of telephone messages from Caroline Rose's grandmother talking to, having me call back. In the end, she does call her back, by the way. And that sort of gives the album a sense of having a central narrative. But in any case, the album is about the sort of struggle to compartmentalize trauma in the face of remembering it all. Remember what you want to remember so that you can carry on in your everyday existence in spite of the fact that this trauma feels overwhelming. Now, a mid-tempo melancholy definitely kind of pervades this album, but there are these really bright, shining moments of melody that kind of give you this impression of maybe like a mirror universe version of OK Go or Fountains of Wayne. And these keep the introspective tone of the album from becoming so overwhelming, and also gives a vehicle for really emotionally wrought performances on the album. Okay, next up I got Frimpong with Vis-a-vis. African high lifestyle has a long history that reaches way back to the 1950s, and it's subsisted throughout the decades with a sort of a core stylistic components to it, not the least of which is like this polyrhythmic guitar and these sort of cyclical harmonic structures. So chord progressions feel like they just kind of go around in circles. And this album has those things in it. But as a 1970s iteration of high life music, it does have affectations that are kind of characteristic of that period. Now, I do think that you can't deny the influence of Fela on this album. Anything in the mid-70s in Africa was going to have some kind of influence from Fela. He was so hugely popular. And as a fellow Ghanaian with Frimpong, of course, there's going to be a little bit of influence there. Especially that first track, Anogaiwa, has a sort of ostinato bass lines and stabbing call and response horn things that really define Afrobeat. But still, it carries that positive feeling that a lot of high life music has. Now, you get a little bit further down in the album, you're going to hear some things that feel more like more traditional high life styles, especially the second track in this album has those cyclical structures, has the very polyrhythmic guitar style. Now, Frimpong had a couple of bands that he employed as his backing band. One of them was this band, Vis-a-vis, and I really don't think that you can overstate the importance of that band. The horn arrangements and the performance support that they give to Frimpong in these songs, I think is really crucial to the album's overall success. But I will say there's a sense in a couple of tracks where there's some synthesizers on this album that are very, very much of the period, but they sound like they kind of added on, like almost they went in to record this at a studio, and maybe there's a synthesizer in the corner, and the guy was like, hey, let's kind of see what we can do with that. But they really don't get in the way of this being a really great example of high life music, especially for a person who maybe hasn't had a lot of experience with the style. Okay, next up I got Toes for a Long Tomorrow. around the year 2010, I kind of went to this big renaissance for math rock music because of my interest in Battle's Mirrored album, which for me is a personal classic at this point. And through that sort of investigation, I found a couple of Japanese math rock bands that really caught my ear, one of which was Light, and the second one was Toe. Now, I saw Light live way in the back in the day at South by Southwest and loved that band. But one of the things I really love about Toe is that they stand apart a little bit from that because they're not afraid to inject emotions and passion into their performances, especially the live performances. Now, when I think about the origins of math rock, many people sort of attach it to this band, this late 80s band called Slint. And I don't think of it that way. For me, math rock reaches back, of course, into the 80s iteration of King Crimson with sort of gamelan-style, polyrhythmic, interlocking dual guitar work. And I feel like a lot of the math rock that I sort of connected with has very close associations with that structure. And Toe is no different. Two guitars, bass drum, and a drummer actually who plays very much in a style that sounds like a young Bill Bruford. Very jazzy, very agile, and very intricate. But the dual guitar interlocking style is definitely there with this band. And because of this, I really connect with Toe very readily. Now, on For Long Tomorrow, they also append this sort of quartet format with some collaborators that come in, a keyboardist here, a vocalist there, just a little bit to sort of expand the quartet sound without losing the core integrity of the quartet. Now, as I said before, one of the things that I really love about Toe is if you watch any of their live performances, they become very impassioned and lost in the moment and really let dynamics and the intensity rise to its fullest amount without restraint. That part of the band doesn't always translate onto their recordings. The studio albums still have dynamics, you still have some intensity, but just don't have that spontaneity to them. It's very hard to capture that in the studio. So that aspect of Toe is kind of lost on For Long Tomorrow, but I still think there's a lot of really intricate music there, especially if you're a person or a musician with an ear towards complexity. There's so much to disentangle here that it really will keep you entertained, and I still think there's so much of it, this sort of lilting, polyrhythmic structures that are super engaging and in a way, very inviting. Unlike a lot of math rock bands, I feel like Toe has the capacity to be inviting rather than sort of, self-absorbed and standoffish. And that's one of the things I think that really distinguishes them. And that comes through very strongly, I think, on Long Tomorrow. And finally, I got Toehider. I have little to no memory of these memories.
And there's just years of worth of stuff piled and blocking the entrance of the house she's well and truly. She tries to find a phone, but all she finds is radios. Oh, what we see, a girl in pain, a girl in pain.
This one goes out to Kyle over there at All Media Reviews because I know this is one of his favorite albums from year before last, and it's been sort of floating around on my wish list for a while. Finally got into it. And Toehider is the project of single musician Mike Mills. And the fact that he's just a one-person project on this is super impressive because it's a huge, expansive, progressive rock work that really in many ways defies explanation. If you want to have a really unsatisfying description of what Toehider is like, it's kind of like if you think of what Queen was like for A Night at the Opera, the eclectic style jumpers that Queen was around that time for A Night at the Opera and A Day at the Races. What if that was prog metal? That's kind of what you've got on Toehider as a basis. Now, that implies there's a lot of stacked harmonies, and there are some very big vocal stacked harmonies on this, and they're also voiced in a way that's very similar to what Queen would do. But there's also a lot of stylistic shifts, and I think that some of the stylistic shifts on this really add to the concept of the album, because this is a concept album. I mean, as an album that has one single song tracked at 47 minutes long, you can't not have some sort of concept to tie that together if you're going to make it work. And not only is it a concept album, it comes across as a prog rock opera that centers around the concept and the idea of memory. Now, unlike Caroline Rose of earlier, who's trying very hard to compartmentalize memory and get through existence in the face of trauma, here the theory is what would happen if you suddenly had access to all your memories at once. How overwhelming would that be? How would it be to have a memory of something that you had little to no memory of? Suddenly it shows up. And this whole idea is investigated very in depth with this kind of crazy sci-fi storyline with characters and character development, and a choose-your-own-adventure ending in which the story of the line ends differently depending upon if you listen to it on CD or if you listen to it on vinyl. Now, the album is a super ambitious project that took over 3 years to complete, and of course that Queen comparison doesn't do it justice because it does switch styles so much. I mean, it feels almost like a Devin Townsend album. Devin Townsend's albums, almost to their own detriment, has like this sort of ADD thing where they're just constantly switching styles. It's not quite that disruptive, but the sense that you're listening to the entire history of 50-year history of progressive rock squished into a 15-minute recording, that's the sense that's there. You're listening to the album, you're like, where did I hear that before? That sounds kind of like Styx. That sounds kind of like Rush. And so the sense that you're listening to this music and you have these hints of things constantly that jog the sort of nostalgic memory for things happen so fast, actually, I think plays into the theme of the album. An interesting thing that I'd like to investigate further on this surprisingly deep recording. And that's all I got for you guys this time around. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe and share it with your friends. Also, follow me over on Spotify. I'm putting songs up on this year list for 2024, so check it out. And if you want to get involved in this year's 2024 viewers bracket, please sign up for my Patreon below. We'll get you involved. It's a really exciting time as you're listening to all this music and trying to figure out what's going to come out on top already. So until I see you next time, I'll catch you on the flip side.